We are delighted this evening to present to you a designer's innovative approach to branding, storytelling, and experience design with Jim Bull. And Jim has taken the road less traveled and has developed an amazing career in branding and storytelling and has lots to share with us. He's the co-founder and chief creative officer of Moving Brands, a global company that has offices in San Francisco, New York, Zurich, and London.
Correct.
And he has worked on such amazing brands such as Netflix, Nokia, Sony, and Stella McCartney, among others.
Yep.
And he has a real wonderful agency and a lot of work to show you this evening. So without further ado, please welcome Jim Bull.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's always great to be invited here to speak. Do you all know Moving Brands, or is it all new to you?
I know.
You know? You were keen to say that you knew that. Well, that's the first thing. I'd just like to know how much people know, because the more of this that's a conversation, I think the better. I've got tons of work I can show you, and I can talk the hind legs off of a camel. So I can just talk and talk and talk. I should apologise for the accent. I've got a British accent. I'm from Britain originally, but I do live in San Francisco. I get that question when I say any questions. People are like, do you live here? Do you live in New York? Where do you live? I'm here in San Francisco. Anyway, I'll just start. This is me. My beard's a little bit shorter at the moment. And whilst we're doing this, feel free. Some places don't like people on their devices. I think it's a good thing. If you want to tweet about this or Instagram about this, I kind of made this. This is you guys. This is me and Moving Brands. You can use the hashtag Jim Speaks. That's one I use when I go out to different conferences and speak at different things. You can just use that and say whatever you like. If you think I'm talking rubbish, say so. If you think I'm saying some good stuff, say so as well. But I thought it might be interesting, because I have had a long career. I thought it might be interesting to start way back. I'm originally from this little place called the Isle of Wight in the UK. I don't know if you know that. We're really proud of the fact that we have this postcard. It's a very tiny island right off the south coast of England. It's the shape of a diamond. And this always used to make me laugh as a kid. I think this was the beginnings of liking graphics, to be honest, because I used to think that this was the most wonderful thing ever. But we've got names there, like Lake. So someone, somewhere along the time, at some point, I think the Victorians thought it was quite funny to say lake that you can stand on, or Newport that you cannot bottle, or ride where you walk. Anyway, this is hilarious on the Isle of Wight. There's not very many people that live there. It's quite coastal and very, there's quite a bit of surfing and stuff there as well, but it's very, very sort of small place. But it's really famous for the Isle of Wight Festival, which is where Jimi Hendrix and lots of people played way back when. It was kind of like the British Woodstock. And this one was back in 1970, but I think there are a few before that. And the other thing it's famous for is a thing called Cows Week, which is kind of like the round the world boat race and all that kind of stuff, but it's basically a big yachting regatta that happens every year. But I just wanted to give you some context of where I'm from, because I'm from a really small place. And I've ended up sort of traveling a lot and living in a few countries, and I think it's always nice to sort of gaze back and see where you've come from. Anyway, when I hit about 17, I got really bored of living on the Isle of Wight. It was a brilliant place to grow up as a kid, but a terrible place to be a teenager, particularly a teenager that starts to get interested in girls and drinking and cars and, you know, creativity. And I was looking around me for like other creative people to like do this sort of stuff with, and I decided that I was going to leave that. So I went and studied at a place called Central St Martin's, which is a pretty good college in London. I don't know how much you know this, but people like Gilbert and George studied there, Alexander McQueen, the fashion designer, lots and lots of different people have studied at this place. So I kind of went there and had a brilliant time, 3 years at a degree course, splashing paint around, picking up cameras. We were making films, we were doing advertising, we were doing hand-rendered type, we were doing all kinds of things, photography. There was all kinds of sort of parts to this. Actually, it was a really big course. I think at one point it had almost 400 people on the course. And I remember we used to have a computer room that's probably the size of this middle bank of tables. And there was 12 computers in there, max at least, that the whole course used, because none of us had our own one, because no one had a computer back then. I didn't have a mobile phone until I graduated 3 years later. But it was a really great course, and it taught us to think on our feet, to not be reliant on the tools, to be reliant on creative thinking and how you can tell stories in the most effective way. And that was a really good grounding, because we weren't actually trained in the tools of graphic mark making. We were trained in the thinking behind how you come up with a concept and an idea about what mark making is. So it's fundamentally different, and I think it's quite different to the way design is taught more and more often now. As it's got more and more popular, I was having a talk the other day with some people who've recently graduated, and I was saying that when we were studying graphic design, because I did a graphic design course, we were actually being taught and told that we were getting taught things that the rest of the world didn't quite understand. And I think that was true back then. It was such a long time ago that it wasn't a popular thing to do. It wasn't that popular a thing to study. And now it's a really popular thing to do, and it's a really popular thing to study. But I think as that's evolved more, it's become more and more and more and more about the tools to make you effective at designing, as opposed to breeding you to be a creative thinker, to come up with ideas and to solve problems through creativity. Anyway, I had a brilliant kind of baptism of fire in design there, and when we graduated, we basically learned that they taught us that we were in control of our own destiny. So when we graduated, a few weeks later, we basically, 5 friends, there's only 4 in this picture because I couldn't find one with all 5 of us in, but this is us back in 1998, and we just set up our own business straight out. We didn't go and work anywhere else. I did a bit of work experience at a few places and kind of like got the feel of the lay of the land, but straight out of college, we basically set our own business up, and that business was in London, and the only resources we had was enough money for 1 month's rent, because back then having a space was an important thing. It's not really that important now, but actually having a physical space was really important. We had 2 laptops, which we had bank loans to get them. We had 1 desktop that we borrowed off one of the guy's girlfriends, who was kind enough to let us borrow it, and we gave ourselves 4 weeks to make enough money to pay next month's rent. So some people often ask me, when's the right time to start a business? When do you know that you're ready? When do you know that you're prepared to do so? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's just something you have to feel for yourself and get that right. But having 4 weeks to earn enough money to pay next month's rent was pretty motivating, to say the least. There was no way that we could fail at that. We basically gave ourselves a task and we had to get that done. Fortunately, we achieved that. If we hadn't achieved that, there would be no Moving Brands now. We kind of all would have looked at each other and gone, right, we've got no money between us. I'm going to get a job here. I'm going to get a job here. And that would have been the end of Moving Brands. But fortunately, we did win a few jobs. It started rolling in, and that's how it started. So it was basically the act of doing. And I talk about that a lot with people. I'm a firm believer in the act of doing. I talk about concepts and thinking, but actually when it comes to business, it's the actually just doing something. And even if you don't know quite what you're heading for, the act of doing will make things happen. The act of not doing definitely doesn't make things happen. It just, nothing kind of happens. But now in 2015, we're 100 friends, and this is the way we talk about ourselves. We're the founders, I started the business, but there's actually 100 people in Moving Brands that we consider friends, and we purposely keep Moving Brands at a size across the studios that we got that we more or less know everyone. Actually, at 100, it's quite difficult to know everyone's names, but we've built our own tools that enable us to know everyone. And the whole business is sharing work across all of our studios and working jointly on lots and lots of different types of work. And we're based in San Francisco, Zurich, London, and more recently in New York for the last sort of 12 or 16 months or so. And like I said before, I live in San Francisco, but in my new role, I'm very often in New York as well. I came to San Francisco 4 years ago, and my task was to build a team that was probably 5 people up to something like 25, and we've kind of done that now. I think we're about 27, 28 people here in San Francisco at the moment. New York's kind of in the same position. I think we've got 6 people or 7 people in New York right now. It's in a shared workspace. We've just negotiated our own studio space down in Soho on Broadway, and I'm using my time to go over there and kind of build that out. Because coming from London, moving to another country, building another studio without really knowing anyone and how things work here in this country, but kind of believing that I could do it anyway, taught me a lot. So now if I can hop to New York and do that, and Moving Brands has got further plans to grow and hop to other places, particularly in the US, because it's such a rife, buoyant market compared to some of the other places where we're at. And anyway, the things that we do, just to explain this to you, but branding comms, for those of you that know us, that's probably what you know us for, is, brilliant identity design, brilliant communications design, basically the graphic design and branding and, making of communications for businesses. But we also do experience design, which is more at the product end. So that's stuff like website. We've done some of the biggest websites in the world, but Moving Brands has always been a bit quiet about that and not really called ourselves a digital agency, although I was joking with my CEO the other day, if we pulled that out as a separate business and made it its own thing, it'd be one of the bigger, better digital agencies if it was just pulled out. And then a new thing called business design, where clients are actually coming to us and saying, we need a new product that's going to aim at this certain age demographic or this certain type of person. Can you work with us to actually create what these new products are and how they might go to market, and then work with us to create the brand, and then work with us to create the comms. So this is a much earlier stage where actually kind of bringing the products to life to start with. And we've done that kind of work for a whole bunch of people. You heard about some of the people that we've worked with before, but there's the kind of really big tech companies, particularly those working in making products. Something about our offer that resonates well with them. There's a bit of fashion in here, there's a bit of finance, there's very big companies, and then there's very small companies. So there's a whole bunch of startup businesses from here in the Bay Area. We've done quite a few of those now. And then other ones in the UK, like the BBC. Netflix is one that I'm not really supposed to talk about, but I kind of talk about it a little bit now. And Arcadia, which is another fashion one. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of tech in there, but it's very broad. There's some pharmaceuticals in there, there's some fashion in there, there's all kinds of people. So we're quite good at working with a client who wants to change, and we're really good at helping them actually achieve that change, that moment where they need to communicate in a different way. And we talk about what we do as stories, systems, and people. And this is my last boring slide, by the way, I think. But any project, I think, can be broken down into these things. And actually, I think this is a way of thinking about creativity in some respects. So this is written in a way that's very sort of brand and for our clients. But I think you can think about this as a way of thinking about what you're trying to do for any creative task. First thing is, what's the story at the heart of what you're doing? So in the case of what we do, it's stories that drive businesses, products, and services. So what is it that we're doing? Well, I sometimes say to clients, what is it that you're doing? What's unique about what you're doing? And why should anyone give a shit? And that's really important, because anyone can say they've got the best people, we've got the best technology, we've got the best services, we're faster, bigger, brighter, shinier, whatever it is. But that's not a real difference. A real difference is why does this thing exist? What is the reason why this business is different? That's a credible, real, unique difference. If you can identify that, you're on a real good winner. This is the same if you're trying to, make a painting, or you're trying to design a piece of furniture, or whatever it is. What's the truth at the heart of what you're trying to do? That's going to be the thing that's the story at the heart. Once you've got the story, basically, what are the systems that kind of make that happen? Or in our case, systems that are designed for brands. So that's the identity system. So for us, once we've got the story, it's like the logo, the color palettes, the icons, the photography. How does moving image work? How does advertising work? How does this all fit together? What are the unique objects and graphic elements that you use and combine together to bring these things to life? And then finally, and this is a bit like, what's the point of all that? But it's all about people and the experiences that are going to engage those people. So if you can, as an agency, sort of do a bit of all of this, you're in a really good place, because a client knows they can come to you, get a concept, get a story, create something with you that's got real purpose in the world. Then they know that they can come to you and get really great branding, let's call it, design, communications that are in service of that story. And then those systems are in place to enable great experiences to happen. So they also know that when they make a website, when they make a film, when they do advertising, it's all going to come to life in a cohesive and interesting way. Just some, I thought I'd give you some like local bits of work that you might see out on the street a lot. This is a thing called Flywheel. This is one of the things we did actually about maybe a year and a half ago, maybe even longer, 2 years ago, but they've gradually got more and more popular and more and more popular. Now you see them everywhere. So this was my drive-in back from Silicon Valley the other day. I didn't take this while I was driving, I promise. And you see these everywhere. I now sort of joke that if I see a flywheel car, that means I'm getting near San Francisco because there's so many of them everywhere. Do you guys see these on the street? Anyway, so this is a brand that we developed, all about the brand identity, what it meant, how do you bring that to life. So that's a real local one, just to see it. And another one that's around a lot at the minute is this thing called If Only. And If Only is an experience. It's kind of like it's a place where you can buy and find unique experiences that you can't find anywhere else. So you can do things that are really expensive on here, like a round of golf with Tiger Woods, but you can also buy things like a little Twitter badge that you can send to someone for $1 on their birthday that's from, I don't know, some famous pop star like Justin Bieber or something. So there's kind of price range for everyone, but these are all unique experiences, very, very unique brands. And on the drive-in over the Bay Bridge at the moment, there's a big billboard there, and it's on all the Muni stuff as well. So some of these things are very local. I just want to show you those so you've got some context of some of the local startup type brands that we work with. I'll now show you some, I'm going to get into the work now, so this is the fun stuff. So this is a project that we completed, I don't know, maybe half a year ago, maybe a little bit longer. It's for a brand called DeviantArt. Does anyone know who DeviantArt is? How would you describe what DeviantArt is?
Just like a place where all kinds of artists gather.
Yeah.
But they don't have a kind of sense of branding. It's just like enthusiasm.
Yeah. I mean, for those of you who don't know, DeviantArt is one of the largest art communities online. At any one time, its website is ranked always in the top 20 of hits. Lots of the images that you get served up in Google and those sort of things are actually images off of DeviantArt as well. But it's a huge, huge, huge art-based community where people can upload their work, get critique from other people, also get commissions, they can print things out, they can do all kinds of stuff. But the problem they had was, you know, a decade or so ago, they devised this logo. And what they were finding was when they were going into conversations with very big brands that might want to do sponsorship on there, because they're basically in an age demographic of like 15 to 35, and there's millions and millions of people on this site each day. Actually, they've got a graffiti artist on their website who's the most viewed artist in the world at any moment, because his art is really, really popular and it's getting lots and lots of views all the time. So he's more viewed than Da Vinci in a day because he's on this DeviantArt community. Anyway, they needed to refresh the brand because it wasn't communicating in the right way. They were finding they were sort of not able to look credible enough. They had all the numbers, they had all the stats, they had all the stuff, but they didn't really look credible enough to sponsors. And also they were finding that the community didn't have a logo or a way to represent itself that they could be really, really proud of and that was going to make them or see them well for the future. So we went on this journey to change them from this thing on the left, which looks like a sort of hideous 90s skate brand, to this thing on the right, which looks like a hideous cool, no, I'm joking, which looks like a much cooler, much more design-centric, much more art-centric, interesting rally cry for an arts community, is the way I see it. So next thing I'm going to show you is a film. It takes you through the whole process. There'll be a few films I'm going to show you tonight. I hope you like this one, because it takes you from the first meetings, the problem, what we then did, and then how that came to life. And I should say that this project was unique in the fact that we were creating the brand at the same time that we were creating a mobile app. DeviantArt had spent a decade just on desktop, and so they were working with us to work out what's the best way to change a desktop experience in a community that people love into a mobile experience. So we're doing the mobile app and the brand all at the same time. Here you go, let's check the volume. Yeah, so that's DeviantArt. I know there's a lot going on there, and that's a big project compressed into quite a small amount of time. But the first thing, you know, as I was saying before, story, systems, and then experiences that are for people. So the story we defined for DeviantArt was this idea of bleed and breed art. So if you cut them open, they just bleed art. It's all they think about 24/7, you know, the people that work there. Also, the community, a really, really devoted community. So that's all that they're thinking about. That's all that they're about as well. But breed art is a massive part. I mean, it's a community for a start. So it's all about helping each other out, critiquing work, growing as an artistic person yourself, and growing in a community. I mean, you've got to remember DeviantArt and the website, you know, there's people on there that have developed as artists and become professional artists and never been trained in the arts. They just had a talent. They might have been from a place or not had a support system around them which really helped them nurture that as a talent. But this online community allowed that to happen. So that idea of breeding art and the education of art and how they can make more people in the world aware of themselves and aware of this community and aware of art in itself was all part of it as well. So this might sound like, really, that's a story, these sort of like 4 words? Well, there's actually a longer version of this that's behind it, which talks about what bleed and breed art is about, why it's relevant to DeviantArt, what it means for the community, what it means for potential sponsors, what it means for up-and-coming artists, what it means for press and PR. There's a whole bunch of work that goes behind this. But as a captivating statement that the CEO, CMO, all these people in the organization, creative directors and heads of marketing can kind of keep in their back pocket. So if anybody asks them what it is that DeviantArt does, not what it is, what it does. It bleeds and breeds art. That's its function in the world. That's what it's there for. And then once you've got that story, it's all about the system. So the system is the identity, the typeface, the colors, the icons, and how that all comes together and how you can bring that together to make real sense. And then once you've done that, you've got a compelling kind of experience that's really, really relevant to people. And like I said before, this and the brand was all done hand in hand at the same time. That was actually pretty interesting because, you know, we tweak things in the app and come up with colors and make color differentiation and make things smaller, make things bigger, and then that would repurpose back into the branding work. Likewise, the branding work was coming up with ideas like different types of angles across things and how that might work, and then that was feeding back into the digital work stream too. So another project, this is a bit more recent, was for the BBC, and this is a project called BBC Newsbeat, which used to look like this. Believe it or not, this is a news channel, online news channel from the BBC, one of the most credible kind of news things in the world. And this is for youth. This is for like kids and, you know, 12-year-olds all the way through to like 23, 24, 25-year-olds. It didn't look like that was what it was to us. It looked very staid, very conservative, very normal, very, very BBC, you could say. So how do you bring the world of BBC and the world of youth culture together and make something credible? And this was the job that we were put to us, was how do we revamp the way that this works and what happens to the brand and how does that come to life? So I'm going to show you that journey. You'll probably get the idea. I'm going to show you another film. It takes you from the beginning all the way through and it shows all the different aspects of what we've done. But it was quite a considerable change that we achieved. Yeah, so that's Newsbeat. So again, a story. I'll skip over this because you get the routine. There's a story at the heart of that, why they're different, why that matters, how you bring that together as a system. And then once you've got that system and you've worked all of that out, and again, this was digital as well, so there's a lot of haptic type work happening there. How does stuff move? What's all the kind of, behaviors, I suppose, of the digital experience, and how are those unique? And that gave us these really lovely kind of moments, how the identity comes to life in Chicklet, and then how it works in layout and communications. And both DeviantArt and BBC Newsbeat actually last night in the UK picked up a few awards. So BBC picked up a winner award and a kind of commended, and DeviantArt also picked up a commended. I think it was for computer arts. What's it called, Lan? She forgot. Anyway, it won some awards, so it's nice work. I hope you like it. Brand Impact Awards, that's it. Great stuff. And then maybe some of you haven't seen this. I thought I'd show it to you because it's quite a nice bit of work. It's a fictitious piece of work, but it was set to us by Fast Company. They came to us and said, hey, you're moving brands. Hillary Clinton's just had this new identity that's happened. Do you remember when she launched her identity? Of course you do. It's like a H with the arrow and all that kind of stuff. Some people love it, some people hate it, lots of debate online. But they said, hey, you're moving brands. If we gave you a short amount of time, I think we had 5 days. If we gave you 5 days, do you think you could better it, or what would you come up with? So they set that to us as a brief. We foolishly said, yes, we'll do that. And these are the results. But I think it's a really interesting project, and it's quite interesting to work in this way where you're nimble and you're just relying on your own creativity to kind of see you through. But see what you think of this. The film kind of tells the whole story, so I'll just let it play. But it's moving brands, doing what it does in 5 days to create an identity for Hillary Clinton as a reaction to the one that was out there a few months ago, or still out there. So that's that. So they ran it on their website. It trended and it went really ballistic. And then every time something was said in the press about it again, they would repost it and get more kind of stuff in it as well. It's been a really successful piece for them this year. It's one of their more successful ones. And it was great fun to work with. And I should say at this stage that it was the London, New York and San Francisco studios all working on that collaboratively. There's a lot of copywriting happening here in San Francisco, a lot of design happening in London, a very, very collaborative process between lots of different people to get that to happen in such a short amount of time. And there's all these other projects that I could talk to you about, but I haven't really got time. Very big companies that we work with. Maybe you want to hear more about Netflix, but I'm not really supposed to talk about it very much. But this is new and yeah, anyway. But something I can show you, and this is hot off the press, actually this launched yesterday. Don't worry, we didn't do this. This is a Irish telecommunications business called Aircom, and we've recently rebranded them. I don't actually know too much about this. This is a project that happened in London. It basically launched yesterday. There was huge kind of launch party and all that kind of stuff, and it's been sort of it's doing well in press and PR and those sorts of things. But I thought I'd show you. So this is what it looked like, and then we've done this to it, and you've guessed it. There's a film. So here's a film about this new thing. We've changed the name a little bit too. Here you go. Brand new, it's not on our website. I think it's going to end up on our website maybe tomorrow or maybe Monday, but you're the first sort of public audience to see that. So yeah, it's Air, there's this story, live life on Air, and then the system and how that comes together, all the experiences, and this is really nice. You can see all the designs we were doing for the interiors of the stores. They really made that. We worked with them to get that to happen. All the films that were made and TV ads and all kinds of stuff that went out, all the web experience and all the mobile experience all done with us. But one of my favorite things is we also made a bespoke typeface that was, you know, part of that as well, which is influenced by the look of the logo and how that comes to life. So there's this new font that we've made that's got all these particular curves in it that kind of represent all of that. Here's some of the new GIFs that are going to go out in lots of comms recently. But that basically launched last night, so that's a first sneak peek at that. And then that's about me. I talk fast, so I've got through most of my stuff now. But basically, questions I think would be good. And you can ask me about anything you want. I know there's a lot of stuff there from how I set up all the way through to different pieces of work we do. But I just wondered, and I like questions because I think you'll get a lot more out of asking me stuff than me showing you lots of work that is on our website anyway.
Have you ever done any work for the government?
Which one? No, I'm joking. I'm just trying to think. No. I quite like to, though, I think. It'd be an interesting area to work with. We've done a bit, you know, lots of charity work and different stuff like that, organisations that are NGO-type organisations. We've recently done a lot of work with an organisation called, they basically control internet URLs. I'm trying to think what they're called, I can't remember off the top of my head. Huh? Public Interest Registry, yes. So it's not government as such, but I think in the early days of the internet it was part set up by government to basically designate all the suffixes, you know, like .org, .ngo, .com, .net. So they're one of the organisations that's controlling some of that stuff. No, but I'd like to get into government work. It'd be really interesting, particularly off the back of doing the Hillary thing. I mean, that's not government as such, but it's kind of a maybe the lighter end of that kind of world. So it would be interesting. Is that what you work in? Interesting.
Oh, hello.
Hey.
I just wanted to say, I noticed in the last two ads that there was a primary focus on typeface. There wasn't so much of a typeface focus. It was primarily on color and shape.
Yeah.
And there was a repetitiveness in some kind of loop that was in the last video that you showed. Was that planned, or was that kind of something that just worked out like that?
Well, it's different every time, you know, depending on the brand, depending on the sector, depending on the type of business area that someone's in. You want a very different look and feel. You know, a kind of high-end restaurant compared to, say, a record label, compared to a government organisation, compared to a telecom. It's all very, very different. One of the things we always look for in our work, though, is a sense of contrast. So, but actually, I've found over the last few years, we've been more comfortable with there being more and more in it. So we're finding that we used to do like a calm logo and an expressive identity system around it, curves, graphic devices, typefaces, or the other way around. That stuff would be really calm, but the logo would be really alive. But there's been a couple of projects recently, Airbnb one. There's another one that you should check out on our website called Housing, where we've seemed to have just turned all the volumes up on everything. So it's really colourful, really vibrant. It's moving all over the place. The logo itself is really alive. There's a vibrancy across everything. It might be just the sector and the type of business. You know, Air.com really wanted to feel nothing like it had done previously. It was a very sort of conservative looking telecom business, and it wanted to look much more people-y, much more friendly, much more alive, much more youthful, because that's where they saw that they needed to be. Housing was in India, in the Mumbai market. And so there's a great vibrancy there. It's very colourful. There's a real fight for space in advertising and those sorts of things. So that came to life in a really colourful way too. But say we work with an architectural firm, or say an arts museum or something, you probably have a very, very different approach. But the repetitiveness that you talk about, I mean, a case study film like that, it feels more repetitive because every single thing is sort of showcasing what it's all about. But actually the system, that's where the system really kicks in, like when do you use the logo, when don't you? When do you use the typeface, when don't you? How many weights, which colours? It's the combinations in which you use all of those things.
I noticed that the audio really supported the imagery as well too.
Yeah.
With the Hillary ad, I noticed that it was kind of color dependent. The primary colors were like a blue, greens, reds.
Yeah.
Those were like the primary colors in the ad, and they ran all the way through the ad, and I think that's what kind of drew the whole thing together,
Yeah.
opposed to just using a Hillary logo or
And like I
something
say, it
like
works
that.
differently every time. I mean, some brands, take Coca-Cola for example, it's red all the time. Other brands, they don't necessarily have to do the same thing, or they work in a completely different way. So you get very colourful brands where they don't really have an ownable colour as such. They just have a colour palette that they can use and call upon at different times. And so it's just very different. Netflix is a very red brand, for example. So yeah, it just depends. But it's not true that, you know, what's right for one brand is necessarily right for another. In fact, the worst thing you can do is cookie cutter the same approach each time and just keep rolling that out. It's got to be different. It's got to be considered. And the main thing is to always link it back to that story. If it links back to the story and what it's all about and the direction that that business is heading in, and you're bringing that to life, then that's probably the main thing to concentrate on.
Jim?
Yes, sorry, I'll come back to you. Was that me?
I think that was me. Sorry. What was your personal evolution as a designer? How did you get to where you are now?
I started my own business. No, yeah, I don't know, because I've got like two stages. I've got before I started the business, which is basically in education, and then almost as soon as I graduated, we just started the business. Now, I didn't know what I was doing then. You know, I had a lot of balls. We say, do you say balls? Yeah, I say balls. We had a lot of balls, a lot of gusto. You know, we're very confident, cocky, some might say, arrogant maybe. But we honestly believed that we knew what we were doing, and we honestly believed that we were. Actually, we never really believed that we were talented as such, because that doesn't feel right. But we definitely had self-belief that we could make something happen. And over the 17, might even be 18 years now, I lose track, years that we've been doing this, 1998, do the maths yourself. But, you know, in that time, there's been a lot of moments where we've developed as business people at the same time we've been developing as designers. So, you know, going from a small team of 5 people, you're just all in the mix, all with ideas, all with a comment on the business, all with a comment on what you should spend and what you shouldn't. But as the business grows, you start fragmenting a little bit. Not fragmenting, but you start saying, well, you're better at making business decisions. You're a better designer. You're better at this. You're better at that. And everyone starts taking different roles. That's one of the things I've been proud of in the business is our ability. I think one of the reasons we've kept growing, actually, is that the founders never limited the business by our own talents. And a lot of people that I know that have started their own businesses do that. I don't know why they do it. It's such a stupid thing to do, but because they started the business and because they're the creative director, no one can be more senior than them. You know, they have to get last say on the work. They're also trying to run the business. They're trying to do too many things. And it's much better to say, well, look, I'm good at this bit, you're good at that bit, let's fragment. So really early on, within like 2 or 3 years, all the founders had all different roles, more senior and less senior than each other. And we were all paying ourselves differently based on those roles as well. We all owned the business. So we separated this idea of ownership from our role in the business. So I have a role and I'm also a founder. I don't have my role because I'm a founder. Some would argue that I do, but you know what I mean? And I think that's percolated down. So, you know, our CEO that runs the business now, it's not me, I'm not the CEO, and it's not a person that's a founder. It was a guy that joined the business 11 years ago as a designer level person and worked his way up. And then when we needed someone else to take the realms, keep the thing real, but really push it forward to the next stage, he was showing lots of design acumen. He was a brilliant designer, but a real veracity in business and a real interest in expanding our offer and making us more relevant and continuing to grow the business. So he was the best person to give the reins to. So I'm the founder, but I report into him on a weekly basis. He's my boss. Above that, I'm an owner, and I ultimately could tell him what to do if I wanted. But if you do that, you break your own business, you break the system. If you undermine anyone at any point, you know, if you give someone responsibility for something and then take it away from them as soon as they make a decision, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think that's one of the things that we learned early on. So I don't know about design. I mean, I've never even really called myself a designer. I think I'm a sort of person who started a creative business. And because of that, I think everyone else in my business thinks I'm really creative, but I've never really quite seen myself as a designer. It's always been about the fight to get a business that works and have great creative ideas and be in the mix of all that and just make it happen. So now I'm just concerned with 100 people and making their careers really good. But for us as a business, that can be quite tough. You know, we're not owned by anyone else. We're not financed by anyone else. We've resisted selling the business to anyone else or taking investment from anyone else. So it's a wholly owned independent business. And so that's also hard because every dime, dollar, cent, pound, whatever that comes into the business, you know, that's a pound or a dollar that we have to decide, right, is that going to go towards getting a new person? Is it promotions for people? Is it bonuses? What is it? And so that's harder in an independent business, but it's also a good thing because it gives us the ability to take the business wherever we want to take it for our people and for ourselves. So we're not always kind of worried what this other entity above us is going to tell us to do, which is what happens when you sell your business to one of the other bigger businesses. They normally just take control and you lose a bit of control of the thing. I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Hi,
Yes.
have you ever rebranded a certain company or brand twice, like more than once, or?
Yeah, we have actually. There was
What's about it?
Yeah, there was one called iFi, which was a cute little product. Most of the cameras have now do this themselves, but at the time it was like an SD card that was Wi-Fi enabled. So at the time it was quite revolutionary because you could put it in a camera and Wi-Fi connect and send the images back to your laptop just from the SD card. It's still quite a cool thing if you've got old devices and you need to do all that sort of stuff. But they came to us, we came up with a new name for them, we did a whole brand, we spent like 3 or 4 months working on this thing. They actually went forward with it and launched it, and then their then existing CEO left, went somewhere else, and they went into this little moment of, what are we going to do with this now and what's happening? And they kept going with it and made it into a really successful brand, but they came back to us and said, can you rebrand it back as iFi, but we still want a different new identity and all that kind of stuff. So in the space of like a year, we rebranded the same thing twice. They were always happy with what we did. It's just that, particularly in a startup business, there's lots of pivots and changes in directions, changes in offer, changes in the dynamic in the business, different investors, founders leave, other people join. You know, it's very hard to navigate all of that a lot of the time. But we've done pretty well at trying to navigate, but that's one I can think of. And then we've got some businesses that we work with that are kind of, we've created brands for them, but maybe they're like 7, 8, 9 even 10 years old now. So it's going to be interesting to see as we get older, maybe we'll do a brand twice a little bit more often. Because as much as you make a brand future-proof, and we like to think that we do that, particularly in the way that it can get rendered and work on buildings, digital, moving, how does it sound, how does it work, what are the haptics, how does it behave in the world. You can't kind of foresee everything that's going to happen, particularly with technology. So quite often a brand will, need a bit of a refresh later down the line. So there's some ones that we did a while back, which would be interesting to see if they get little tweaks here and there by us again. That would be interesting. I know you had your hand up quite a few times.
Thanks. The question I had was when your firm engages with a company that you are working with, do they come with a distinct story or a distinct idea of what they want, or is that a process that evolves as they engage with you?
Yeah, well, whether they do have a distinct idea or not, it's something that evolves. So quite often a client will come to us and say, we need this. And we talk to them and work it out, and we agree that they need that. But then we sort of say, yeah, but what about this other stuff? And before we can do any of that, what's the story? And so sometimes what might look like a website just a client just wants an app created really quickly. In talking to them and saying, well, if you spend a little bit more now, then down the line you might be able to save some money if we do a bit more, because you're rushing forwards with this, and we all know you're rushing, and you're rushing. But if we were to not slow it down, but if we were to broaden the spectrum a little bit about what we're going to do, that might mean more of it's going to need to not be changed a little bit later on. So quite often a client thinks they just want a logo, or they think they just want a website, or they think they just want an app, or they just want a communications thing that needs to happen. But in order to create that, sometimes you've got to unpick a little bit more to really get that to work effectively. And the other thing that happens is we work with our clients for quite a long time. So a client will come to us and we'll do that job you've just seen, but then they'll say, okay, we want to make more adverts, we need to do more communications. Oh, by the way, we've got a new product coming out. What needs to happen to that? So we tend to work hand in hand with some of those clients. We've got a client called Swisscom, which doesn't mean anything here, but it's the largest, again, telecommunications business in Switzerland, and that's now approaching an 8-year relationship. I think it's 7.5 years or something. And in that time, we've developed the parent brand, but each and every time they've come up with a new product or any of those things, they've come back to us to kind of make sure that the thing they're going to do is going to sort of tie in with that brand, but also be differentiated. So, I don't know if I answered that or not, but it's kind of different every time, Also, sometimes a client will be like, I want you to do that thing that you did. We need complete change of everything. They're very on board with big change. Sometimes, though, it's more like the marketing team and the brand team inside an organization know that it needs to be big change. But some of the people above that don't necessarily see it that way. They just think a better ad's got to be made this year. But sometimes that's not the case. So sometimes a communications project can turn into a branding project. We've had it the other way around as well, where we've actually been engaged and won a branding project. And then when we started working on it, we quickly realized that the client didn't really want that. They wanted a comms project. So we ended up doing an advertising work stream on that. Of course, we had to adjust all the numbers and do all that kind of stuff as we went along, because it was less or more effort in different types of ways. But it always changes as you go along. No worries.
Hi. How did you guys first find your clients coming out of school?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, we actually did do jobs while we were at college. Not many, and they were very small. But we quickly realized that every time we did a little thing, we met someone who could then introduce us to someone else, who could then introduce us to someone else. So really early on, we focused on what we called our ecosystem, which sounds like a really old word now. But back then, that was kind of like, yeah, because if we get our ecosystem happy and we communicate what we're doing and we share with them, they'll share with other people, and more people will kind of know what we're doing and know what's happening. There was also a lot of kind of luck in it, I suppose you would say. But I also think we made our own luck. So we'd go to a lot of industry events. Even if we weren't talking, we'd just be there, and you meet people and you talk to people and you share and you do all that kind of stuff. The other thing that was really great is St Martin's, the college we went to, is a super good college with a very highly thought of reputation. And it's also a lot of people that graduate from there go and work in industry. So you kind of get introduced to those people as you kind of graduate. I suppose like a old boys club or something, an old girls club or whatever you want to call it. But that's how someone outside of it would refer to it. But it's really just contacts from within the college. So that was one way to do it too. And then the other thing is just friends of friends that had something to do. You know, to us it didn't matter if it was a friend of a friend who only had a few $100s to get something done, or it was a friend of a friend who actually knew someone that ran a big cable company and was somehow felt okay to introduce us as really brilliant creatives, although we hadn't really done anything. That's actually how we won our first thing. There was a cable company in London that used to lay the actual cable in the ground, and that was we won that as a big website redesign. Managed to convince them that we knew what we were doing. At that time, we had no idea how to make a website, but we told the client we knew how to make a website, and they somehow believed us. So then we had a few weeks to basically learn how to make a website. The Moving Brand's first website was just grey. This is a naivety point on our point, but the whole website was just grey with a little nav in the top corner. And at that time, when we made our first website, everyone was like, why is it so slow? And we were like, we don't know. It's only one image, but we put up a huge grey image. You know, you're talking about where, and then somebody else who knew us said, you know, you can just do one grey pixel and repeat it over the whole screen. We're like, you can do what? You know, so we were really naive. I'm not going to pretend to you, you know, but we just believed that we could do this stuff and sort of blag our way through it. Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
During a couple of these projects, you mentioned collaborating globally.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear how you do that, you know, especially during the discovery phase or working on little tiny details on a mark. That can be, you know, a little tricky. So I'm interested to hear how you do that.
Well, it's something that we've become good at in the last 3 years, I'd say. Before that, it was always something we wanted to do, but it was quite difficult. The other thing to bear in mind is that 3 years ago, San Francisco was kind of still trying to grow and find its feet and find talented people and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a little bit heads down, get San Francisco to work. But as that's got better and as that's got its own clients and everything's making sense, it's doing really well and it's growing, there's a better opportunity to kind of collaborate and share. So you're less like this and you're kind of like, oh yeah, if we work with you guys, that would be easy. But we've always talked about the business as, you know, it's kind of one studio. It used to be one studio, 2 locations, then it was one studio, 3 locations, and now it's one studio, 4 locations. And there's a mindset in the business which is like that. We've built our own tool which has got a photo of everyone, what their skills are, which studio they're in. You can click San Francisco and see everyone, and that changes daily. So freelancers even who come in the business, they get put on there, and then when they leave, they go out. So the numbers on that thing are going up and down all the time. So that's one great tool because you basically see who's in the business at any time. So if someone says to you, look, Cecil's got the thing, and you don't know who he is, you can just type him in and he pops up and you can see his face and which studio he's in. But I think it's more of a mentality thing to actually want to work like that. I think a lot of other agencies are told to work like that, but really they're thinking about their own studio, and quite often they have their own profit and loss and they've got their own sort of targets to hit. Whereas we've got those as studios, you know, all the studios have got their own targets, but because we're all like owned by one thing and the founders in the business understand that we're going to be more effective if we can swap and resources and work on things collaboratively, then that can work out. I mean, I'd love to tell you we've got a lot of really technical tools, but we don't really. We're just on the phone a lot, on Google Hangouts a lot. There's tons and tons of meetings all the time, which can be a little frustrating. You know, I spend the first 5 hours of my day in about 6 different meetings across different projects or different things that are happening in the business. And there's certain crossover times. So the beginning of our day just happens to line up with the end of London's day, which is sort of in the middle of New York's day. So they have a sort of bit in the middle of their day, which is like tons of meetings. London has a bit at the end of their day, which is tons of meetings. And we have a bit right at the beginning of our day, which is tons of meetings. And then we used to resource as studios, but now we resource in Inc., so that's New York and London, we resource across the 2 studios. So whether you're in whether you're in New York or whether you're in San Francisco, you could be working on any project. And then we also have a global resourcing which looks at things from a global thing. So at the moment we've got a pitch which is in New York, and there's 4 people in the London team working on that, 2 people in New York working on that, and 2 people in San Francisco working on that. And we all have to meet at that time where it's relevant, and we just talk and we do all the things. And then basically everything's online, so, you know, God bless Google, but, you know, all the Google Drive tools and, you know, presentations that we can all work on and comment on and do all that kind of stuff. You know, we're just using whatever tool works for us that's secure and works for everyone, and that's really easy to get to. But it's more of a mentality, and I know a lot of other agencies have tried to do that, but it's all right to talk about it here, but if up the chain, you know, there's no advantage money-wise or strategically wise to work collaboratively, that's where it sort of breaks down, whereas we have an actual advantage to do that, or it feels that way. Or a CEO's telling us to do it. That's the way he wants the business run, so everyone's doing it that way. And I think it's a belief inside the business that that's better for everyone, because you're working and getting different perspectives from around the globe as well, because, you know, you're kind of making things a little bit more global all the time. I hope that helps. I'm sure you wanted to know more about the actual tools, but really it's a mentality and then just using the tools that are out there. Yes.
Hey, so I'm a little curious. What are some examples of brands out there that you maybe haven't worked with that you think are doing it really well, like spot on, creating sort of like dynamic, future-proof brands that are going to live on for a long time? And you kind of look at their work and say, really good job. I'd love to work with them.
Yeah, no, interesting. This is where you find out that I'm not very generous with my creative point of view. Well, Apple's always cited as being brilliant. I'm not sure. I think it's all right. Who works at Apple here? Anyone? Probably about 5 people, right? No. I think they've got their work cut out as they diversify more and more, and as their products become more complicated, which was always the thing that wasn't what they were about. It was always about being really, really simple, but it seems to be getting a bit more complex to get it to work all the time, from my point of view. And I also think they might be entering a phase where everyone's emulated them to the point now where do they change the way they look now, or do they just keep going with what they are, what they're doing, and how long will it be before they're a little bit boring looking, for want of putting it another way? I don't know. I think that's more of a question to them than whether it's good or bad or indifferent. I really like the HBO brand and a lot of the stuff that's happened recently, particularly in the ident work that's happened, and particularly in the if I don't know if you use HBO Go or HBO Now or whatever it's called, but those sort of experiences. I think a lot of that work is really, really great, really simple, works really well. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question, that. I always look at them and think, right, what are we going to do with that? Rather than, you know, that's a brilliant piece of work. I mean, there are a few agencies that I respect a lot, and basically anything that they come up with seems to be really, really good. There's a great agency called Us Two. Do you know them? They're good friends of ours. They made that game, Monument Valley. Have you seen that? Oh, you must have seen that. Download it. It's phenomenal. It's the most beautiful game you could play. But they do a lot of work, and they're doing a lot of stuff at the moment. I saw them do a post about experimental work they're doing for car dashboards and user interface and human interaction design that's happening in that area. That's really, really progressive. They're a really great company, sort of friends of the business. And then there's another one in London in the UK called Bibliotech. They're a little bit more sort of Uber design, I call them, but they're like super cool. They like all the old Swiss stuff and all the old German stuff and everything in between, but they're a bunch of Brits, so everything they design is just like totally spot on, beautiful things. They've just done a magazine called The Hour, which is like a magazine all about watches and horology, and it's a really beautiful and really simple idea where they've just taken the H, the O, the U and the R and placed them at the 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock positions on the front cover of the magazine. To me, that's just lovely. And to be able to actually get that through with a client and get them to do it, because normally there's the masthead and everyone's worried about seeing the word the hour in that sort of third part that's not covered up. But because this is subscription based only, I think, and only in, you know, smaller, more artsy type magazine shops, then that's not really an issue. So yeah, that's a really good bit of work. But the rest of them, I just want to sort of do a bit of work with them, so I'm not sure. What do you all think of the new Google logo? same. Good. Thumbs down. That wasn't me. I didn't say that, Google. Cleaner, yeah, yeah. I think it's a really interesting one because I think as designers we're always like, oh, I'd love to change that. It looks so old school. But there was also a little bit of us that kind of liked the fact it was really quirky. We like the worst typeface that you could possibly have, really horrible, overbearing colours. It kind of looked like it had been designed in half an hour by some startup guys, which probably was the way it was done. But there was something quite quaint about that and something quite nice. So it's going to be interesting to see like how it rolls out for them. I've actually started seeing it in all the applications, you know, every time you look at maps now, and then I'm in the Hangout, and then everything I'm using, it's kind of everywhere, and it's already just normalized in my head in the space of a week or 2 weeks or however long that's been. It's interesting now how the mind can do that. It can normalize something that's really different, and then just over a few days you just accept it, and that's the new Google, and that's it. But I've seen some redraws of it, which I think were interesting, but I always find all that kind of redrawing of something on a design blog quite tedious, if I'm honest. You know, that happens to our work when we do it. You know, it all gets put up, and lots of people with seemingly time on their hands to comment and invest a lot of time and energy in those comments kind of do a load of work on it, but they're kind of missing the point for me. And this is where you realise I'm not a designer, is that to me it's the getting that through, getting that sold in, getting that actually alive in the world is the brilliant thing about it. So any bit of work that someone manages to get through with a client and get signed off and then get it pushed into the world and have a happy client and feel like you love that work you've done, that's like the top achievement. So whether something is a bit close by somebody else's eyes or the weighting is a bit off, to me that doesn't matter so much. I think it's more about getting that to happen. Obviously, when we do stuff, there are none of those issues because we sort them out before it goes live. But you know, I think it's a little petty to critique other people's work on that kind of, you know, basis, because you don't know the conversations that were happening behind the scenes. It's a lot more complex than just a designer making something slightly fatter or slightly thinner after the event. Doesn't really mean anything to me. Any more questions? Must be another one. I don't want to end with that comment. Oh, go on. And then we've got one over there after you.
Great.
The G is cool. Yeah, it's very sort of, yeah, it's cool. Yeah. Good for you.
Question for you on business design. When you design products,
Yeah.
how many of your internal collaborators are spreadsheet guys? And can you speak to the dynamic between collaborating with less creative folk and more MBAers?
Yeah. I mean, I used to say, well, firstly, I think we're people that happen to have been trained in creativity. I don't think that means that we necessarily have a power that other people don't have, if that makes sense. So spreadsheet guys, or however you want to put it, it's not, in my experience, that's not a truism. It's not true that certain types of people in a certain role are creative and other types of people in a certain role aren't. They're just doing the thing that they somehow got trained in and then somehow got a job in and then got good at. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can't have very good creative ideas. So in our business, we've done some scary things like give money guys pens and say, you draw it, you sit here and draw it with us. What do you think this looks like in workshops? And that's quite scary because anything could happen. But because anything could happen, you get some really interesting results. So even if they draw something really, really ridiculous, there's normally something in it which is a truth that they believe about their business, if that makes sense. So even if it's rendered really badly or it's got no kind of design acumen or however you want to put it, there's no sort of sensibility in it. There's something about it from a story perspective which is always really, really interesting. So I don't really know. We just treat everyone like everyone. It doesn't matter if they're the CEO or the CMO or the designer or head of IT. We try and just treat everyone the same, get them involved in the same way. I mean, what's your experience of that? Do you think there's a big difference between creative people? Because do you think that's a truism though, or do you think that's just a thing we like to sort of tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better about ourselves?
I'm not in quite the creative industry you are.
All right. Yeah, maybe there's a difference. I mean, we're getting asked quite fundamental things, so there's kind of permission to sort of say, hey, everyone, let's draw some stuff, and everyone just sort of rolls with it because they're not sure what that process is, they're not necessarily done it before, so we can kind of control that room. Whereas if you're working with someone who's done a few ads before, but isn't a creative person, they've probably got a lot of knowledge that they've picked up on the way, which they keep applying, which therefore means that they think that's the way you do something, but it was just the way they did it that first time and they repeated it. So I've been in conversations where someone's told me that caps is easier to read and caps bigger is even easier to read. That's just total rubbish. It's not true, but it's somewhere along the line they picked that up. And you kind of, in my experience, it's better not to fight that. It's better just to show them it like they want it and then start showing it them a different way, and normally they change their minds or forget that they even said it. So it's about just kind of scooting around it.
And one more question. Has Hillary or her people seen your rebranding?
I have no idea. I'm sure they have. I don't know. I started getting some emails off. I started getting emails off of someone who was part of their campaign here in the Bay Area, inviting me to a few things, but it looked a bit like it wasn't real, so I never really followed up on it. It was kind of like a weird Gmail account, so I just left it alone. There was a question over here, wasn't there?
What would you say to a smaller company that doesn't quite have the following of Apple, but could desperately use a rebrand, but at the same time they're worried that people won't, if they rebrand, recognize them anymore? Do you ever come across that?
All the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, all the time. Doesn't matter how big or small business is, it always believes that everyone loves their logo and it's well recognized and it's got great equity. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's not true. I mean, we always try and remind them that if in a conversation with us, at least, then something must be wrong. And to just blindly say that it's not the logo or it's not the identity is kind of not right. It's worth investigating. I mean, we make it look like we get briefed by a client and we start drawing. That isn't what we do. About a third of the total time of a project is all research. What else is out there? What comms have they done before? How ownable is this? Okay, you're red, but which other competitors are red? Therefore, is red a good idea, or is there another colour that could be an opportunity in this sector? You know, what's all the other strap lines? What's all the other comms? You know, we do a massive bit of work, or a big chunk of work, depending on the budget, of course, that's all about looking at all of that kind of stuff. And so that's where you saw in DeviantArt there was a series of opportunities. They didn't come up very well on the screen, but basically observations and opportunities that we've learned from our research, which is something to be mindful of as we go through the project. And we remind the client, we get the client to agree with those, and we remind them of that as they go through. But taking that first step, I mean, one thing to do is, we never say to a client, if they're not sure about their logo, we wouldn't go into it saying, well, we're only going to work with you if we can change your logo. There's tons of projects that we've done on that first screen you saw with all the identities that are up. I mean, we didn't design all of those logos, but we did other types of work for them. You know, because I wouldn't tell really famous, you wouldn't walk into Nike and willy-nilly change the logo, right? And I think you've got to show the same respect to something that's a small, medium size or bigger size business. So I don't know if I've really answered the question, but there's nervousness about changing anything, right? But one of the things we used to talk about with DeviantArt was, well, what's going to happen if you don't change anything? And the answer was, he had a really good answer. He was like, well, I grow about so many % a month, so that will just continue. And I was like, well, are you happy with that? And he was like, no, I want to do something that's going to increase that, or I want to change that. You know, I've got stuff that I need to do, and there's these things. So I was like, well, changing it might help that happen. It will at least put you in a frame of mind personally. That's the other thing to talk about a brand. Everyone's like, how is it relevant to people? Sometimes a branding project is just as much about making everyone inside that business feel more committed, more on board. You know, finally they've got a way of communicating to the world which feels more like the way they work every day. So, you know, it's about kind of bringing that stuff to life. But sometimes the not changing is the thing that if you talk about that, then that's the thing that kind of gets clients fired up a bit, because that's why they've originally sort of started to maybe consider doing this. And then to say, well, we're not going to change anything is basically deciding not to change anything, so nothing will change in the business. Unless you make some radical, business change, like, different type of product or something like that. But I think brand can definitely change emphasis and bring new points of view on your brand that weren't there before, and definitely create interest in the short term, and then the long term can give you a brand that's able to communicate in the ways that you need it to. Netflix really was just, our brand doesn't work when we're trying to use it. Please help us change it a bit so that it's easier to use. And so that was this kind of work that we did there. Very much a crafting of mark type thing. Be interested to know what your business is. I could have a bit more of a different conversation and give you some opinion based on what it is that you do at some point. More questions? Hey.
Yeah,
Question number two.
Question number two. When you engage with a startup where the funds are usually limited, do you have any suggestion or any guidance on when a startup should be worrying, especially a technology startup, should be worrying about branding? Mm-hmm. Because there are a lot of areas where the funds could be consumed, but branding. When does branding become important for the success of the startup in some way? Do you have any guidance, or do you have anything to throw on that?
Well, I'm a firm non-practical view is that branding is the startup. That's my personal view. So I think the technology you've come up with, the uniqueness of that thing, and the way it's going to communicate that to the world are kind of hand in hand important. But I know full well that when you're getting money or not getting money or whatever that is, it's all about, well, I'm not going to spend that money on brand because I need a second programmer, or I need a head of technology, or whatever those things are. But that doesn't mean that you've solved that problem. You've still got that brand work to do. I actually wrote an article a little while ago called Brand Debt, was the way I was talking about it. And I'm still playing with this idea, so I'm not 100% sure about it. But I figure there's a thing called technical debt. Do you know what that is? Technical debt, as I understand it, is when you say, we've built this thing, it works well, we know this bit doesn't work, but instead of fixing it now, let's do all these other things and kind of get it rolling. And we know that we've got a technical debt, which means in 6 months from now, when we get a bit more money, we can fix it then. I think the same thing's happening with a company's brand. So whether you put effort into your logo or not, or whether you put effort into the comms or not, I think about it like a debt. It's something that you know you've got to do, but you've got to do later. So the real question is, where's the point when you wait? Because you could wait all the way down here and change it really, really late, but that could cost you, if you're really successful, millions of dollars to change everything. Whereas in the middle, it might cost you a few $100,000, but you're not going to have this big expense here, but it might be at a time when, a couple $100,000, that's another ad campaign, or that's this other stuff. And at the early, that's when it's going to be cheapest, because you might be able to get someone in to do it. We've done them for quite small amounts of money, some of these ones that you're seeing that have been done. But even at that point, it's kind of like spending the 200 when you've only got maybe 50 or 100 in total money anyway. So it's really an individual choice, and I think. But what I'm seeing as a trend is investors are putting more emphasis on brand because they've seen how important it is for other things that have been a success. The ones that have got good brands and good product have been a success, not just the ones that have got a good product. And they can see consumers kind of attaching themselves to a product that's got a great brand more than the ones that don't. So they're definitely putting more emphasis on it. And we're finding that entrepreneurs that are coming to us, even if they don't really know what they're talking about because they're tech people and because they've got this great idea, they're talking about brand, even without really knowing what it is. They know it's an important thing. So that's a difference in opinion. That's a massive difference in trend. But I think really early, you know, invariably, if it's really early and you don't really have a lot of money, you're kind of going to do something that's going to do you well for a little while. But there'll come a point after maybe your first round, or maybe halfway between your first and second, where your investors will start saying, right, we need to get this brand right now. But I think if you can be on the front edge of that and say to your investors, no, we need more money for brand, it's probably going to be good for you, because you could probably get a bit more money put in to kind of make that happen, because they're all of the mindset now that it is part of what's happening. More in the consumer-facing products. If it's kind of like some pharmaceutical B2B type thing, then maybe less so. But the more consumer-facing it is, definitely the more emphasis on brand there is. But it's not a clear-cut thing. But I think the thing to bear in mind is I do think you owe a debt to your brand. So if you don't do anything and you've gone through rounds and rounds of stuff, unless you're only just trying to, like, you know, blow it up on the stock market and then you're done. But if you've got something where before that you're trying to get it to happen, or you need it to get at that last stage, brand is going to be part of that mix at some point. No worries.
So I know you said you don't call yourself a designer, but as there are more and more self-taught designers out there, you may have worked with some of them, or you have some on your team. What do they bring versus those with a more conventional, traditional art background or design background as yourself?
You mean self-taught as in didn't do any education in it, just kind of taught themselves at home? Is that what you mean? Yeah, it's interesting. I find that, I don't know how to answer that. What's the difference between the two? It depends. One of the most talented designers I work with, unfortunately he died a few years ago. But he wasn't professionally trained, but he came in, showed lots of gusto to want to be a designer. He kind of half done a bit of architecture and then decided that wasn't for him and was in this sort of no man's land where he didn't know what to do now. And he just kind of almost sort of walked in one day and said, look, I'd really like a job as a designer. I've got all this architecture stuff, look at it. You know, and us being creative people were like, wow, look at all this cool architecture stuff. That's cool. We don't know how we're going to use this guy, but, you know, maybe if someone asked us to make a table or something, some of his skills might apply. But he ended up being a really, really great designer, very touchy-feely, and he did a lot of work himself in music industry, like album covers and different things like that. And funnily enough, there was a guy in San Francisco that we had working with us a little while back, and he wasn't trained either, but he was trained a little bit in architecture and decided to give it up and had gone on this route into design. So, and he was really good too. I don't know, there's something about those architecture peeps that kind of know a little bit about design. I think it's just the spatial way that they think or something. I don't know. But invariably, most people that join us have had an education in design at some point. I was, you know, it's just the way it rolls, and they have a portfolio and you look at their portfolio, but you're always trying to discover something about them around the back of all that stuff, I suppose, in the sketchbooks and in all the stuff that they're doing. I mean, I don't really know what the difference is. I don't think we've had that many 100% self-taught designers work for us. I think most people have come out of a design background and design education. I'm not a designer, but I was trained as one. So I was given some of the ways to think like a designer, if that makes sense. So I don't know. What do you think the differences are?
I mean, I don't come from an architecture background. I studied environmental science. So when you said ecosystem is kind of a bold word, I kind of laughed internally because I think of everything as an ecosystem all the time. So I think that brings an interesting insight, I guess, to design.
Yeah. I often think, I mean, it's the same as what I'm saying. I think quite often it's the things people do in their spare time are the things you actually want them to bring into the studio. So when we first went into processing and 3D printing and a lot of these things that we do a lot now, that came from people on our team just being interested in it and doing experiments and then sort of showing it to other people in the studio. And we're like, well, if we get a 3D printer, you can do a bit more of that. So then we decided to make our own 3D printer, and you know, suddenly you've got something going on. It's like when we've got people in the business that are designers, but they're also musicians. That's really interesting because we need to make a little sound thing for something. They can actually do a bit of that. So we try not to limit people based on their training. It's more about what they're into. You know, if someone's a good singer and we need someone to sing, quite often some of the guys have got quite good voices, so they do some of the voiceovers if there's limited budget on some of the movies that we make as well. So it's all about bringing whatever skills you've got to the table. Convincing someone to do that is a bit harder. People tend to keep their other thing away from work, because as soon as you bring it in, it gets less precious. You know, if you like playing the guitar, you don't really want to do music at work, because then that makes music work, and then you don't like it in the same way that you do at home. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. Is that it?
This kind of bounces off. I have kind of two questions. The first one is what made you choose this career path? Was there like a certain typeface that you saw, a certain ad on TV, a certain poster that you saw when you were growing up that made you want to choose to do what you do?
Yeah.
And then my second question is, after working on a project from 8 to 12 hours in a day with your buddies, do you go home and still design? Or do you just, you know what I mean though? Is it overkill, like, you know, on some of the stuff that you want to do?
Yeah.
You know, how do you balance that?
So the first question, I was one of those kids, I was always drawing. I always loved drawing. I went through a phase of thinking I wanted to be a painter, and then I wanted to be a fashion designer, and I'm talking like when I'm 8, 9, 10, you know, all that kind of stuff. And everyone around me used to tell me I could draw really well, and I was really embarrassed about it. It wasn't like a proper skill to me, it was just like this other thing. Maybe that's why I talk about design like I do. But what we had back then was this thing called MTV, which actually showed music videos. And I was really into album art, you know, the big gatefold thing with pictures of a band that was a mystery to you because there was no like information you could find out about these people. So the imagery and the touchy-feely nature of that thing, and then music video, those were the things that got me into really thinking, wait a minute, I'm sure people are getting paid to make this stuff. That would be a really great way to use my creativity. Sounds like a better bet than painting, or a better bet than these other things. So there was like album covers and music videos and all that kind of stuff, and that became really influential stuff to me. So I wanted to make, as I saw it, it wasn't necessarily design, but I wanted to make powerful images that would make other people like me go, wow, look at that thing. Normally attached to music. So that's how I got into it. And then as you find more out, you know, and you get nurtured through that a little bit, and then you know, get a bit of education in it, you kind of open up to all this other kind of stuff. And then the second part of the thing was about, do you still design when you go home?
Like, you know, you just said like it's
yeah.
being a designer in the daytime and then coming home and still designing. You know, sometimes I can you just feel like a zombie. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. You got to be at work at 10, and you've been designing for 16 hours on multiple projects. You know, how do you balance that with your personal time? You know,
I think in the early days I used to do that. It would be like doing it all the time. There was no work and home. It was all the same thing. But then as I've got more mature in that, I've realised actually stopping at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or whenever it is actually a really good idea, because it doesn't drain you so much for the next day. There's only so much creative energy you have, and the longer you keep going with it, you find it's not all good. Right. You know, there's certain amounts of time where it's good and where it's not. I'm really good early in the morning. I'm good after the first coffee. I'm bad after the second coffee. And I'm terrible for most of the day, and then about 4 or 5 o'clock I'll start gaining some interest again and I'll get a bit more done. But I do stuff at home. It's just, it's not quite the same stuff. I don't bring work home and keep working on it, but I'll do other things. So I'm creating my own luxury watch brand at the moment, which is like crazy. But I've been designing watches at home for the last few months. And that's basically just different faces, different styles of hand, different renderings, different typefaces, different dimensions, different complications that we can add to the watch and all that kind of stuff. And then I've just bought my brother, he's doing this with me, and my wife. Me, my brother, and my wife started this weird thing. But we've bought this milling machine, so we can actually mill out all the metal parts for the thing, and we've got all the mechanisms, and we're going to start sort of making prototypes of these watches. Now, that's not design as such, but it's still a creative outlet. Yeah. And if I'm not doing that, I'm up on my computer upstairs with Logic, and I've got an Akai MPC, and I'm basically just making beats with some drum pad things. That's about it.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Super cool stuff. I have a two-part question. I'm curious to know about what mistakes you made starting out early in your career that you learned the most from,
Yep.
and if you see sort of a common trend of mistakes with young new designers coming out.
Common mistakes that I made. I'm trying to think. I remember there was one time when I'm good in short bursts, so I got a lot of energy for something and I'll want to get it nailed really quick, and if it's not nailed really quick, I'm just like, ugh. I'll either decide it's done or I'll rely on the rest of the team to kind of like make it happen. I like starting things. I'm really good at starting things. I'm really bad at finishing them. So this watch thing, I'm going to start that. My brother and my wife are going to have to finish that because there's no way I'm going to have time or energy to do it. So there's kind of a mistake there. I think one of the biggest mistakes I made early on was trying to be a professional rather than a creative with clients. So I was in a meeting, I was with my co-founder and a client, and I was presenting, and actually he and I have only been in about 5 presentations together because we don't see eye to eye on almost anything, apart from when we're having a beer and a hug, then we're good. But if he likes the blue one, I like the red one. It's just the way it is. We're totally opposite. But he said, and I was presenting the client, and I was being really professional. I dressed sort of differently, and I was trying to like be professional. And we came out of the meeting, and he said, he just went, "What the fuck are you doing?" I was like, "What do you mean? I'm just presenting and being nice and polite and all the things." He's like, "Yeah, but that's not you. You're not." I'm kind of nice these days, but back then I wasn't. I was a bit of a tyrannical, arrogant person. But maybe I am still. But he was like, "Yeah, but that's not you. That's a waste of everyone's time. They're paying us to be the creative people in that meeting. They're not paying us to be another suit," I think was the way he used it. It's a bit like saying that, the money pushers or all that kind of stuff. But he's like, they're not paying you to be that. They desperately need what we've got, and we've got the ability to be able to like see round corners for them that they can't see, jump over obstacles that they can't get out of their vision. As a creative person in a business mix, you can kind of help navigate around a load of that stuff. And he was kind of really angry with me for like trying to be them, and I learned really quickly basically from that point on not to do that. So I never dressed up ever again, and I just kind of try and tell it like I see it, because if you pander to a client, tell them what they want to hear, you're basically not doing the job. You need to tell them what you really think, or what you really think in the context of all the ramifications that are going to come from that, but at least you need to be giving them a very honest opinion all the time, because as soon as you don't do that, you're going to do the work a disservice, and probably the thing isn't going to be a success. Because I think as designers we have a gut instinct on something, and it's normally right. But the thing is, you've got to find the best way to like bring that to life in a way that's going to keep everyone kind of happy. So I think that was one of the things, was just to not try and be something you're not. Just be yourself. There's designers out there that are like even looser and sort of louder than me, and they kind of, they dress really, really differently. I'm just the way I am, so I think it's important just to be the way you are. If you're very well thought out, then you need to be a person that presents yourself in that way. So that was one of the things. What was the second part of the question?
Just a trend you see of common mistakes that a lot of new designers make, if you have thought of that or seen that.
I don't know. Do you mean in the work or just in the way that they work? Or I see a lot of repetition in portfolio, which I find a little bit annoying. And it depends which school someone's come from. But there's certain schools where you see a portfolio and it's great, and then you see another student from that school and it's exactly the same portfolio. It's just some of the words are a bit different and all these things. Like, to me, you're not getting educated in design in that way. You're just replicating anything. So if you happen to have been on a course which is like that, it's really important, I think, to throw other stuff in. When I was getting trained, they used to talk about it as take your sketchbooks. But I think sketchbooks don't really work anymore. I think you've got to like put other work in that you think is relevant to you, relevant to your life, things that you really think are great and really help bring things to life. You're welcome. Right, people are leaving. Huh?
We have a class.
Oh, good. What's it a class in?
Graphic design too.
Oh, nice. Maybe I'll come up and have a look. Thanks. Good luck in class.
One more?
Off my question. At what point did you decide to not be a designer and be, I guess, more of a leader, I suppose?
Yeah, I can't really remember when it happened. There was definitely a point when I realized that we were hiring people that I considered more talented than myself, and therefore I was more used to the business, helping drive that business forward and create more of a narrative and story around our own business. So that's when I started doing more talks and presenting things and talking to press and doing all that kind of stuff. But I think it was just a natural thing. You know, we kept getting busier, so we had to get more people in, and therefore there was people to do all of that great work. And that's when I then became sort of more like a creative director, because I wasn't doing the work anymore. In the early days, I used to edit films. I used to do all music creation. I used to take all the photography. We used to basically do it all ourselves. As we added people, you know, obviously I wasn't the best editor in the world, and I wasn't the best typographer in the world, and I'm certainly not the best designer in the world, but I like to think that the people we have working with us are. So getting them to do those things that they're kind of more passionate about in a way, more enthused about doing, was always a good thing. And that gave me the ability to be able to concentrate on other things, like who we are, how we're represented, how we speak in the world, and all of those kind of things. But I don't know if it was a moment. It was like a series of different moments. I mean, coming to the US was a big moment for me, because suddenly I had a whole studio that single-handedly, in some respects, I was responsible for, and I was responsible for growing. Whereas before, you know, it had always been 5 founders, and then I'd always had like lots of people around me. And then suddenly I was in a different country with 5 people on my team, which I didn't really know, and then trying to get that to happen, and how do you do that in a moving brand sort of way. So that was definitely about not trying to do the work, because I had to nurture that team to give them confidence in their own abilities to come up with that stuff. But you'll find as the majority of you would go through this, it'll be you're a designer, then you'll be a more kind of senior designer, and then you might be a creative director, which means you're kind of giving, well, I like to say give the designers avenues to run down. Other creative directors are a bit more tyrannical and say, do this, don't do that, do this. But basically you're doing that. And then if it's your own business, you've got the business that you're thinking about as well. And even if it's not your own business, quite often you can go from creative director to more of a partner, and then they might make you like head of a studio and those sorts of things. So there's lots of that kind of stuff that can come out of being a designer. But it's kind of like a gradual process. And every time you go through it, you've got to let go of stuff that used to be, that was originally the thing that why you got into the business in the first place. So some people are comfortable with that, and some people aren't. And it's okay to like not progress. So, you know, if you really want to craft the marks, stay at that level, craft the marks, be the person in that studio that everyone says, he's the mark crafter, he's the best. You know, it's up to you. But I think people have to make a decision whether they want to go on a journey that's more towards client and business, or they're going to keep on a journey that's just in the design avenue. And that's just a personal choice.
Jim, I have a question for you.
Hello.
What kind of recommendations can you make to like future grads in graphic design?
Wow. Well, I think it's pretty simple. You've just got to work really hard, make really great work, concentrate on not just the way that work looks, but also what it means, what's the story behind it, because that's really, really important. And then just get really good at being able to communicate and be able to talk about your work as much as how good you are at being able to execute it. Because being able to talk about it, being able to present it, being able to, you know, get someone to believe in what you're saying is really the moment where great design becomes something that can make something happen rather than just be design. And then I'd just be really dogged about meeting as many people as you can. I get as much work experience as you can. If it's paid, unpaid, doesn't matter. Just try and work at agencies and different places that you think are very credible. Try and get in there, because every time you work somewhere, even if it's only for a week or 2 months or whatever it is, you're going to make contacts, and it's those contacts that are going to be the things that turn into your career eventually. Because you basically just meet people who suggest you and recommend you and send you to different sort of places. Quite often people come to us and we're like, well, we don't really have scope for someone right now, but there's this other agency you should try there, or whatever that is. So it's all about the network that you create around you. Don't stay in your little pocket of design. You've got to be like that when you're doing the work and when you're making things happen, but you've got to be all about like what else is out there, what's going on, and how do you, and don't worry about pestering people. People will turn around and tell you to get lost if they want to, but designers and creative people tend to not really be like that. It tends to be quite helpful. So yeah, you can pester people and try and get things to happen. It's this balance between being respectful but being not so respectful that you're undermining your own potential. You've got to kind of like push yourself and get yourself out there as much as you can. Hopefully that's good.
So we're gonna take one more question after this, and we're gonna wrap it up right then.
You've talked about story. You've mentioned it a few times. Can you say a little bit more about that and how you glean that information? Because correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind of getting that the creativity starts with the story. Like it's not just about being creative. That story is what gets that creativity going.
Yeah, I mean, we sometimes talk about our processes: assess, define, and create, and then there's another thing called thrive, but really they're the three. So assess is the kind of assessment that I was talking about, which is a lot of desktop research, looking what else is out there, what other brands are communicating, all that kind of stuff. But there's also tons of like internal stakeholder interviews that we do, where we'd work with the client to identify people or certain roles that we need to talk to get an honest opinion about what the brand is about, what we represent. It's a brilliant tool as well, because you find out like who's negative about changing, who's positive about changing, all of that kind of stuff, and you get lots and lots of opinion from within the business. And we do that in a one-to-one sense, so there's no kind of worry about what you're saying, and also it's totally confidential. So we reveal what people say, but we don't reveal who said it and that kind of stuff. And then we basically use all of that context in workshops. So once we've got all of that, we'll put it all on the wall and we'll workshop with people and say, right, let's go through this, and what do we agree with, what do we disagree with? And it can be quite eye-opening, because you get a CEO looking at statements from his own organisation, some of which is really negative, some of which is kind of mediocre, some of which is not what he thinks or she thinks the business is all about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone gets a sort of input on that. So there's a lot of stakeholder interview that happens, and there's a lot of assimilation of that into opportunity. And then there's this stuff where we workshop through that with clients as well. Workshopping is a big part of what we do. We do a whole bunch of workshops. Sometimes they're a whole day long, sometimes they're half a day. We've done them over 2 days as well, where there's a series of different exercises, which on one hand is a report of the assessment we've made and the types of things that we've discovered. Then there's workshops with some of that material to try and glean out for the leadership or whoever's part of the project what's important to them and what do they disagree with and what have we got to fix. And then we do a series of other things like visual workshops, story workshops, where we all sit down and try and write that story. Or like so we do things like we will never, and so the whole organisation, different people in the organisation, will never do this, we'll never do that. We will always, all kinds of different things like that, which to some people feels like really a waste of time, and to others they get really, really into it. But it's never a waste of time. It's full of such information about how that organisation sees itself and sees itself compared to its competitors. And then we take all of that and start to write this story. And the story is normally a short form narrative. So that's 4 or 5 words, which is this thing that can be kept in the pocket. It gets confused with a strapline a lot of the time. It's not really meant that way. It's meant as an internal rally cry to everyone in the business to say, this is what we do. This is the unique way in which we do it. But there's also this long form narrative, which is much more detail about the reason why that's right and the types of things that we do and how that goes to market. I mean, there's a couple of other people in the organisation you should probably talk to. There's Aki and Michael, who does a lot of our internal copywriting, and he does a lot of the interviews that we do and that kind of stuff as well. They've got a lot more details around those. And we also mix that up and down. So some clients need a lot of interviews but not a lot of workshop. Others need tons of workshop with lots of different stakeholders from lots of different locations and hardly any interview as such. So it just depends on that organisation, the size and scale, what's the best way to spend or not spend the money in lieu of everything that we've got to get done as a project, so you try and balance it out that way. But time-wise, it's almost a third of the project in that phase to get us to a point where we're all in agreement about what we are and we're all in agreement that this is insightful stuff and then a story that represents that. Did that help? There's a lot more to it in a sense. I'm just focusing on a couple of elements.
One quick question. Is it your designers that are doing that interviewing?
Yeah, we've got copywriters that do that. There's also strategists that do a lot of that work as well. Yeah, we've also got a consulting arm which is in that kind of business design part of what we do. So they're in that. We've got some really smart people with some really smart education behind them that kind of help steer and nurture that project. Yeah, it's not just a solely design-focused way of going about it. It's very strategic in a lot of areas.
Yeah, it's funny. My question was about the same thing, but let me just maybe rephrase it a little bit. If it's when you were answering that question, you kind of you were talking about established business and companies where there are a lot of stakeholders and you can draw stories out of them. What about like emerging businesses, startups? Do they have to have a story to build a brand? What could be that story? How do you work with that kind of situation?
Well, I think they do need a story to build a brand, and I think it's possible to get that out of an organisation. Normally there's a reason or story behind why an emerging business is set up. It's either that they've learned something from working in another business and think that it's currently done wrong and they've got a better way of doing it, or a more efficient way, or they've created a new product because at a certain time something annoyed them and they just wrote a little program and suddenly that felt like a good thing and suddenly they've made a new thing. But there's always a story behind it, like a reason why that's important in the world, if you know what I mean. I mean, like Uber, for example, I think one of those guys couldn't get home on a New Year's Eve and was really frustrated with the taxi services and couldn't book anything. And so he just thought, I've had enough of this, I'm going to try and write some sort of program that's going to be able to call up this thing. And that's kind of like the beginnings of the thing. But early on, that can be used as part of the story. You know, why that story even now is still a compelling thing to hear about why that exists. It was a frustration in an old, dying, archaic system that wasn't fit for the world and didn't work very much, didn't work very well. So our story is all about doing it a better way, doing it in a more dynamic way, for a way that's sort of fit for people. And that's the same whether you're making a luxury watch or coming up with some company that makes bags or a piece of software. I think it's the same thing. There's always something at the heart, which is the reason why. Isn't there?
Now when you mentioned that watch thing, so I'm thinking like there are sexy companies with cool stories around them, and they become successful. With in case like yours, you're doing something on your own in the free time and designing those watches. How do you then transform it to a brand, and how do you market it? What's the story behind it? You just wanted to try to do it. You just liked it. There is no story.
Yeah, there isn't. But then when you sit down and think about it, and you start thinking about it from a story perspective, there is, I think. It's either that, luxury watches are too expensive right now, and maybe they could be made with the same amount of quality for a lot less price, or maybe it's just about the fact that there's so many wearables right now that how can you bring that back to something that's kind of new? I get what you're saying, but it's really early stage. In those really early stages, when it's very in your mind and you're very in the workings of the thing, then maybe you don't quite have the story yet, but it emerges from doing that. What I find interesting is that I'm working out a manufacturing process to make a watch, but I'm also dealing with a brand at the same time, and they're informing each other. So I'm kind of letting it have a bit of fluidity for a while before we define it too hard. And I think there's always that phase. I mean, like even the name, we've got a name that we like, but I've not locked it because I want to do a bit more research. I mean, the way I'm really going to do it is probably engage moving brands to put all their talents into it, but I'll be the client, which is going to be strange.
So in your case, do you feel like you're ready to put that story down and create a brand, or
I'm yeah, we're not ready yet. We're still prototyping. I mean, we've got our first aluminium watch case, and we're kind of looking at it going, oh, it's not as thick as I thought it would be, and you know, all that kind of stuff, because we've drawn them all, and then we've made 3D renders, and now when the thing's actually milled out, it's kind of like, oh, it's not as big as I thought, or it's smaller, or the dial needs to be bigger. I mean, I think we're going to have a good year's worth of just tweaking and trying to find identifiable elements that we think could make the watch unique, if that makes sense. Before it's brand, you know, like Apple's got the curve and you know all those different little touches. We're trying to find out what those are. So we'll see. We do have a story in the fact that we want it to be one of a few British, let's call it, watch manufacturers making very high quality watches. So they're not going to be cheap things, but we'll have to see. I know I'm not answering your question, but I'm trying.
Please give it up for Jim. And just to wrap it up, and I'm introducing myself last minute because I was on another event at the beginning. I'm Ivan Trujillo, the program director for graphic and interactive design at UC Berkeley Extension. I just wanted to let you know that we run these type of presentations oftenly through the year, so stay tuned, go to our website, and you can find interesting information there, which is ucberkeleyextension.org. Another thing that is really important, we are starting our fall semester. In case that you have any inquiries, in case that you have any kind of questions about the program, in those folders you have my contact information, and I will be able to provide you with anything that you would like in case that you're interested in starting classes with us. Normally we run 6:30 to 9:30, and sometimes Saturday classes. We make it easy for working professionals in terms of taking courses with us. We don't make it easy in the classroom. Our level is almost, one can say that is grad level outcomes, right, when you go to grad school. So we have great professionals teaching our courses, and they're working professionals. They just come and teach one course, whatever they're experts in, and that's how we run it over here. And another great thing is that we are actually filming this chat, and it will be on our website, especially for those of you that got in a little late, so you can see the beginning probably in a week and a half or 2 weeks' time. Thank you.